When I saw Brian Dean sold Backlinko for $5 million, I thought I was missing something. But then I listened to the interview behind the sale, and I wasn't missing anything. Brian Dean just left millions of dollars on the table, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So who is Brian Dean and what is Backlinko? Well, in short, Brian Dean is the founder and sole operator, or he was the sole operator of Backlinko, and Backlinko was swimming in a sea of sharks, and he was dominating. So Backlinko ranks and still does rank for all sorts of very ultra competitive keywords. On this slide, I have Backlinko showing at number 1 and 2 in Google for SEO 2024. Brian Dean also ranked in YouTube for several competitive keywords. And then here, Backlinko shows at number 14 overall for the keyword term SEO. SEO stands for search engine optimization, which is telling people how to rank in Google, which translates to money. If you rank in Google, you make money. It's as simple as that. So this is an extremely lucrative niche, and it is ultra competitive. And Brian Dean was absolutely dominating. So today, we're going to talk about how the sell price was way too low, Backlinko's revenue. We're going to get into Brian Dean's low confidence, the initial contact, how the sell went down, Brian's mindset throughout the sell, Brian's outlook on playing it cool, Brian's sell price and how he arrived at it, the SEMrush contradiction, the handshake on the first call, and how this did turn into somewhat of a never-ending sell that caused Brian a lot of stress. All right, so the source here is the Built to Sell podcast hosted by John Warrilow. And so the website is builttosell.com, and John even has a book on Amazon. So I wanted to go ahead and give credit to John. And now let's get into the Backlinko revenue, which was $2 million, 1.2 million of which was profit. And this came from selling high-end courses on how to rank in Google. And Brian said he hadn't thought about selling when he was approached. And that's not really a lack of confidence, but it does foreshadow the lack of confidence that is to come. So let's go ahead and play a clip from 1727.
But maybe it was a confidence issue. I was like, why would they want to buy this business? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Only after did I realize, oh, actually, I had a pretty good asset here to sell, but I didn't realize it at the time.
All right, so there it is, straight from Brian. Maybe it was a confidence issue. It definitely was a confidence issue. He didn't realize he had an asset. That's what I found so incredible about all of this. How do you not know that this is an extremely valuable asset? You are ranking for some of the most competitive keyword terms in an ultra lucrative niche. How do you not know that Backlinko is worth so much more than you sold it for? That's something that is still incredible to me, even after listening to the interview. But there, Brian's lack of confidence shone through. And then here he talks about after the sale takes place, oh, maybe I did have a really nice asset. You certainly did, Brian. What you accomplished with building up Backlinko and ranking for so many keywords and doing so with really just you and a few contractors, it's just incredible. What an asset. So yeah, it's too bad he realized this after the fact, but we'll get into more of this. But I wanted to definitely get that quote from Brian. And then here I have on this next slide, maybe it was a confidence issue. It definitely was. If you had more confidence in this, you would have sold for much, much more. And then so let's actually fast forward to 1807, where the initial sell comes about.
Forms of digital marketing. How'd they reach out to you? Well, they emailed me out of the blue with a fake email saying, hey, we'd love to partner with you sometime. Let me know what you think. And I just ignored it because I get tons of those emails. And I was like, nah, I don't want to do some partnership. Because I've done this in the past. And a lot of times it's like, we want you to promote our thing. It's like some influencer marketing thing. I'm like, I'm not interested in doing that. And then they followed up like 2 weeks later, like, we're interested in buying a company. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's a different story. Now I might be, pique my interest a little bit.
Okay, so at this point, if you get the email about the vague partnership, which I can understand blowing that off, and then you ignore that outright, and then they follow up with a we want to buy, that is a very serious buyer, right? They are indicating intent. They want to buy. They're not messing around anymore. This isn't a partnership anymore. They started out with the partnership and they went straight to we want to buy after being ignored. That tells you strong buyer intent. So at this point, again, this, if nothing else, this should have raised Brian's confidence that, oh, I really do have an asset here. This major, by the way, publicly traded, over 200 million in revenue SEO software company wants to buy Backlinko. If it's just me, even if I have no confidence in the company, instantly my confidence goes up because why would this major SEO company want to buy my company unless it was a real legitimate asset that had serious value to it? So again, Brian's lack of confidence, I still don't understand. Even if originally he didn't have it, it should have increased just by the mere fact that this company is seeking you out. So let's continue on. Brian continues, he also said, I wasn't married to the business, so this wasn't like something where he wasn't going to sell or he just, he was too close to the business. He stated, I had already started another business, which is Exploding Topics, which from everything I've read is doing extremely well. And he continues, and I was wondering what to do with this one it was a manna from heaven, honestly, because I was thinking, should I wind this thing down? So here we get more into Brian's mindset, where he's thinking, he's going the opposite direction. It's like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't really want to continue doing this. I've already got this other business that's doing extremely well. Maybe I should just sunset Backlinko. And then he also said, I'm sick of doing courses. I'm sick of being in front of the camera. Like I was ready to. And then he said, like I was ready to sell emotionally. I just thought practically no one would want this thing. So it wasn't a matter of why I can't sell my baby. Like I was ready to do it. So here again, we get into the low confidence. I was ready to sell emotionally. I just thought practically no one would want this thing. So this is what you think. This is your point of view. But the buyer intent, SEMrush's emails are telling you quite a different story. So again, it's like, why didn't you start to pick up and think, okay, I do have something here, and let me start playing my cards rather than coming from this place of desperation? Because when you're thinking, I don't know how do I wind this down? No one would want this thing, and then you're just looking to sell because you're looking to move to your other business. You've got to take this. This is you don't get these opportunities a lot, right? These only come up so many times in life. Hopefully, more than 10. But in this case, it's here, it's present, and Brian's more thinking downward and inward versus looking at the objective reality. So let's go to timestamp 2020, 20 minutes, 20 seconds in. And by the way, I will link to this interview in the description, and we'll play a clip.
When I got this message, I was instantly interested. I was like, oh, definitely, I want to sell. So it didn't take a ton of arm twisting. Although, of course, I played it up on the first phone call. Yeah, I would think about it, actually. I would consider maybe selling. Looking back, I don't know if that made a difference. Like if I was going to sell this, my new company, I don't know if like this kind of stuff makes any difference. Like these people that are buying companies, they're smart, they're sharp, they have a number, they know how you act on a call is not going to make a difference unless you're a total jerk.
Okay, so there, I just think Brian makes a false assumption, right? These people are sharp. People that are buying companies, that are valuing companies, and they're coming in to buy, they are sharp. But it's not like everyone's still susceptible to influence, and they are subject to human psychology. And so, yes, I think Brian's demeanor, his positioning, it does influence things. It does matter. It may not have mattered in this case. Here, he's talking about playing it cool. He may have played it cool with his demeanor, but he didn't play it cool with his price. He came in so low that they instantly bought. So we'll never really know on this side of it. But I think Brian's getting this wrong. He's giving people too much credit and not giving himself enough. Playing it cool, not being here to sell, it can make a difference. That is going to influence. And also, when someone really wants an asset, if you press them, you can push them higher, because this is a strategic acquisition for, in this case, SEMrush. So it was very strategic on their part, and we get into a little bit more of that later. But yes, his outlook could potentially matter, but we never find out because his initial price was so low. All right, so let's continue on. Brian came at his sale price of $5 million because that was 3.5 to 4 times the previous year's revenue. Here, Brian makes the mistake of valuing his company based on, again, his subjective, what his outlook is, and he's not valuing it at what it would be worth to SEMrush. So he came in very low because he was just multiplying his revenue and computing a number. And so he's going by this formula, which sometimes formulas are helpful, but he's not looking at the fact that this might be worth more to SEMrush than me. In their position, they may be able to leverage this higher than I can. And in fact, I know they can. But that's how Brian arrived at his sell price. And then so let's play another clip from 1855 in getting at what SEMrush, which is, again, it's an SEO software company, what they told Brian about their about purchasing, how they were looking at the purchase.
I had never met. So I think it was more, they were looking at as they told me later, they looked at the landscape of their market and realized we could compete with this site or we could just buy it. And that's sort of where their high level decision of how they got interested came from. Do you remember that?
So we can compete with this site or we can buy it. That doesn't make any sense. Even during the interview, I thought that doesn't make any sense. The reason why is they're not a competitor to Brian Dean. In fact, Brian Dean had talked about in this interview, he had been somewhat kind of partnered with them in a way. He had been a customer. They had done some webinars together previously. So they were never a competitor of Brian Dean. Brian Dean's not selling software. If it was a competitor site, it would have been Ahrefs, which is another SEO software company that offers similar software. Brian's not a competitor. They were looking to Brian to have really a feeder website into SEMrush and gain rankings for all of these different keywords. Now, what's interesting is Brian actually gets at this later. So SEMrush contradicted themselves in the story that they were telling Brian as the sale was unfolding. So Brian buys this, competitor thing. We can compete with you, or we can buy you. They were never going to compete with Brian. There was no competition. They're not the same company. They're completely different. But again, Brian was ranking for some extremely lucrative keywords that SEMrush was paying for, likely a lot of these keywords in Google AdWords. So if you just do the math, you could get a good baseline for what it would have been worth for SEMrush to have organic rankings for all of these keywords. So again, Brian's just not he's not valuing his company where he should. And a lot of it's because, one, of low confidence, but then two, he's just looking inward rather than looking outward at what SEMrush would be thinking. So this next slide just gets at that quote. We've looked at the landscape of how people find us and how people find software like us. And a lot of them go through a site like Backlinko first, and they trust in you, and they trust in you, know this website, and we could also use this as a nice asset that gets a bunch of traffic. So this is what SEMrush told Brian later. This is a quote from the interview, which directly contradicts what Brian says. We can compete with this site, or we can try to buy it. Again, they were never competing with one another. And then Brian continued, and their sort of marketing philosophy at the time was, if we buy this asset, not only will we rank in Google for these keywords that we buy the asset for, those we already rank for, now we have two spots we can control for SEO tools. Exactly. This is why SEMrush was looking to make the acquisition. It just made financial sense to them. And they were already, now they rank twice in Google. They have a social proof because we have this Backlinko website, which a lot of people know Brian and trust Backlinko. Here, Backlinko is sending people to SEMrush. This was a very easy and obvious target for SEMrush. And I'm sure they are extremely glad they did. They got very, very lucky with the sale, and their stock price should have gone up as a result, because this was like a free $10 million. I don't know the numbers behind it. I just know that Brian's positioning and his rank were easily worth that, and the brand, of course, that goes along with it. So on the first phone call, there was already a handshake agreement, which that Brian later said told him that he priced too low. And they asked, what do you want for it? And he said, I was thinking 5. They said, it sounds okay. They didn't look at any of the numbers. They didn't look at anything else. And then so we have this stunningly low amount. And Brian said, I was stunned because they didn't look at my numbers. They didn't look at anything. It was literally just, so it was just okay. So I think maybe they had a higher number. Now looking back, they probably had a higher number of mine. They're like, we should take this before he changes his mind. That is what they were thinking, because it was so low. I think they were shocked themselves. Like, I mean, it was so low that SEMrush was just like, okay, like we really don't need to look at anything. And here's another thing that I think goes overlooked. They never had to look at anything. The value of Backlinko was there. It was apparent. The value was in all of the keywords that Backlinko ranked for. Backlinko came up, was dominating SEO. The brand was known. Brian Dean was known. The value was already there. There was no numbers to look at. And 5 million was probably so low, it didn't matter what the numbers said anyway. And again, I think Brian is thinking of more of a one-to-one. SEMrush wasn't going to go in. They weren't buying this to sell high-end SEO courses, which is how Brian was making his money. That's not what they were looking at this for. They were looking at this for leads and feeding into their website, their software. So SEMrush is a search engine marketing company, as its Google card says. And it's an American public company that has a SaaS platform, and the platform is used for keyword research and so on. This is from the Google card. They were founded in 2008, and in 2022, the revenue was 254.3 millions, and they're publicly traded. So if I'm Brian Dean, SEMrush tells me they want to buy my company, I'm going to look at the revenue behind this company and have a feel for what kind of budget they may have. And it's going to be higher here, right? Because their revenue is so much, and they're working at high margins because they are software as a service. So this is another factor where you should have, this is another indicator that maybe I should start off higher than what I have here at $5 million. And I'm surprised that Brian never came to this. Like, this never occurred to him while he was coming up with a price. I'm sure he had a few days to decide. But this gets out where I was talking about in another video. Hire a consultant as insurance for any major transaction. Here, we have a major transaction. This is a life-changing event. And as Brian talks about, $5 million was a big deal for him, and he really wanted this deal to close. So this was a significant amount of money to Brian. Brian is extremely successful. He will continue to be extremely successful, but this was a lot of money. So for this much money, I'm going to hire a consultant just to talk to me, I'm actually going to hire multiple consultants and see what they think I should value this company at and what I should sell for. And I'm also going to have them help me through the negotiations. I don't want to take this all on by myself. And as the interview continues, Brian talks about why this would have been a good idea, not in those words, but we see he has some obstacles to completing the sale. All right, so now we get into the never-ending sell part of this. So Brian flies out to Boston headquarters, and he's not exactly sure why he's flying out, which is understandable. He thinks the deal is going to be done. I don't see any problem with that. He signed a letter of intent before leaving. He thought the deal would be done. And then SEMrush, once he gets out there, they require a list of all of the contractor he's ever worked with. Then they want to look at his revenue numbers. Then they want to look at his analytics. And in the aggregate, everything takes about 3 months for the deal to complete. And then as I talked about with the contractors, Brian has to contact 150 contractors and get them to sign a waiver. I would have never done this because Brian talked about the painstaking process of talking to every contractor that he's worked with through Upwork. It sounds like he was mostly dealing with Upwork, and get everyone to sign a waiver, or as many as possible. I'm not going to do this. And again, talking about the revenue and the analytics, this is all just stuff they were asking for. And he's priced it so low. No, I'm not doing this. And if you want me to do this, then you're going to have to pay me to really, in effect, work to make this sale. Because Brian ends up going through a lot. He spends a lot of time going through all of these different obstacles that the SEMrush legal team throws at him, and they're just trying to make sure they're meeting all of their checkboxes. But in the process, they're causing Brian a lot of anguish, and they're creating a lot of work for him. And Brian was eager to get this deal done, but I think looking back, he would have taken more control over the deal, because this really got out of control to where they were just throwing out all sorts of requirements. They were never telling him when the end would be. It was just like once he would finish with one thing, then they would give him another task. And when you're looking at the value of Brian's time, which I'm sure his when his hourly rate is computed, it's quite high. He spent a lot of time working through this deal, and numbers need to be sent over, and information needs to be given, control needs to be relinquished, et cetera. As given access to the domain name, et cetera. There are things that need to be worked through for this deal. But SEMrush putting him through all of this, and it sounds like it was the legal team. You need to take control of the negotiation, not let this get so out of control. And that's yet another reason why I'm going to have more people on my team, so that we don't have this situation. Because if you're not familiar with this deal, you don't know how all of this goes down. You're not sure what's how this process is unfolding. And so for $5 million, no, we're going to come to an agreement where it's going to be reasonable. And if you do want me to go through all of these, this 150 contractors, we're going to have to come up with something where you are compensating me and paying me for that, or we come up with something more reasonable. Maybe you're contacting the people. But Brian leaving to Boston headquarters, that happens. The letter of intent is there, but he needs to, like, at this, at some point, Brian needed to get wrangle this deal in and get this under control, where they were both working on equal footing, which they were not. Brian was really just trying to complete whatever they threw in front of him, and they were throwing as many things as they could think of in front of Brian. And Brian talks all about this in the interview. So again, the interview will be linked in the description. And then so Brian ended up contacting what he termed as a pitbull lawyer to help him with the finalization of this deal. And we're going to go ahead and play a clip from 3410, because there are a few interesting things that Brian reveals in this clip.
I have no idea if he's even going to show up, because half the people on Upwork are flaky. So I'm on this call petrified that I'm going to be like, here's me with my lawyer. And, he doesn't even show up. Fortunately, he showed up, and he was like a pit bull on the first call. The first call, he was like, this thing, you need to change this, you need to change that. He was like super aggressive. I'm glad he had my back, but he was a little adversarial. So after the call, I was like, Jeff, chill out, man. Like, this deal's pretty much done. We don't need to, this isn't like a lawsuit. We're on the same side here. So
all right, so here's another point where I disagree with Brian. This lawyer came in and he did exactly what he needed to do. And this guy was from Upwork. So he really, really helped Brian. And Brian talks about this. Brian talks about this lawyer really helped me. But Brian needed this guy, and he needed to put the SEMrush legal team on the defensive. Forget about the fact that the deal is done. You don't know what other aspects of this deal are coming up in really the rooting of the contract, right? Of this final deal. So you do need someone that is aggressive and who is going to take control of the negotiation. You need someone like that on your side. You probably needed more people like this on your side even before you ever started to finalize the deal. You needed people that were going to look over the terms and what final sale price and the valuation you should have arrived at. But this lawyer was very, very helpful, and it was good. He needed to make things uncomfortable. And so I think, even though this turned out, everything seemingly turned out okay, Brian thinking this guy came in too aggressive. It's not. He didn't come in aggressive. Like, that is exactly what he should have done. He should have came in there and he should have made sure that they respected you, which, at points it comes out that they did not respect you, the legal team at least. And you need to make them understand that you're not just going to be pushed around, and we're not just going to listen to everything you say. In fact, I'm surprised that SEMrush didn't didn't approach this and make this easier to close the sale because they really had like at least a $10 million gift in this final sale price. Here, this lawyer was desperately needed. He was very helpful. Brian talks about this later. It's not like he talks bad about the lawyer, but no, he doesn't need to settle down. He's matching exactly what should have had this intensity that he brought. It was good he did. And then so 34.50. So let's continue playing here.
He realized that, then he was great because he has tons of experience in M&A. And that's why he was so aggressive, because he realized that was outcome. And he didn't want something in the deal, especially non-compete wise, to come back to bite me down the road. So he ended up being super like the MVP of this whole process because he helped me navigate it all. And also I would have signed something that would have been, maybe detrimental in the future for me. And he helped me avoid those roadblocks.
What was the big... Exactly. So this lawyer, you have to realize it's not just about the money, it's about the agreement terms. Because when you look at the contracts, and there are no standard contracts, you might think contracts are standard when you're dealing with these companies and you look through their language. They're not standard. These legal teams, you have to keep in mind, the legal teams are going to look out for their client's best interest. So you need someone who is going to meet them in the middle, or not. I'm not trying to say like meet them in the middle in terms of negotiating in the middle, but meet them because they're working for your best interest as well. You need that person. So this guy needed to make sure that beyond the money terms that you were in good shape. So yeah, he needed to be aggressive. And if it's unfriendly, it's unfriendly. But that's just how it goes. So sometimes people get uncomfortable with things being contentious, but that's just how it is. You have to make sure that your best interests are protected. So he came in there like he should have. I mean, just by what Brian describes, I already like this guy. So Brian talked about the liability that's potentially avoided because, yeah, they included some terms in there that were actually, let's see, that was 35. Yeah, let's keep playing because Brian talks about liability that was potentially avoided.
Biggest thing he helped you avoid, like I'm sure there were dozens of examples of things, but if you could put your finger on one, landmine you almost stepped on and he showed you how to avoid that landmine, what was it?
The number one was liability. So in the agreement, it had something, maybe this was a contract agreement that was tied to the deal, I don't remember, but it was essentially, if I did something bad, I'd be liable for that. So with a public company, the potential damage is huge, right? So if I said something or did something that, cost millions, I could be liable for that amount of money. And it's...
Yeah, so this lawyer came in and he did what he needed to do. And so if he made it contentious, if he made it uneasy, he was doing his job. It's not that it necessarily has to be contentious, but he has to come in there and the SEMrush legal team has to respect your position and not try to include ridiculous clauses where you can potentially be liable forever and ever. So then Brian gets to talk about talking about how the deal is not finishing and how the SEMrush legal team kept throwing things at him and the deal was just not ending. So let's go ahead and play starting at 40:40 on here we go.
Because I live in Portugal, so there's time zone differences and they're scheduling all these things at like 5 p.m. Boston time, which is like 10 p.m. here. So I'm staying up to do these calls with lawyers and they're just asking me stuff, or we go on a call and schedule it and I rearrange my whole life around this call. And then they're like, oh, what was this call about again? It's one meeting in the whole day. It's like insignificant to them. I'm like, oh my God. And just, oh, okay. Well, and a lot of like, okay, I think we only need a couple more things and we're almost done. And then I send them, actually a couple more things. So there's a little bit of like a carrot in front of me where I was just sending them stuff. I'm like, there's nothing else to know. There's nothing else to know. Like, you want my...
Okay, so there he gets out how this contract finalization just got out of control and he lost control. And so now he's subject to the whims of this legal team. And so again, this is why, you have to work and you have to make sure that both sides are on equal footing and that you're not in a desperate bargaining position where you're really just, doing everything that they asked for. You can see there that Brian said that they would set meetings and they wouldn't even know what the meetings were for. So he gets to the point where enough is enough. Hey, we need to finish this. And eventually it did finish. It took a while. So beyond the low sell price, just a lot of mental anguish, as Brian put it, he was under a lot of stress to get this deal done, to finalize it, to finally finish it. And it did end up finishing, but it did take months to finish. And in part, this is because for a long time, Brian was working solo. Then, he did get it sounds like he got a really good lawyer off of Upwork. So then the deal ends up taking place. So let's go to Brian's biggest mistake, which the interviewer John Warrilow asked about, and it goes at 39:36.
Fully above board.
And I think we've already probably touched on it. The biggest mistake you made in the process of selling, like if you could rewind, is it sort of naming your number at the beginning, or was there?
Yeah, I probably would have needed a higher number because worst case scenario, because I think I was afraid of them saying no, not realizing that that's super unlikely. No matter what number you throw out there, they're going to come down to whatever number they're comfortable with. So you don't have a lot. It's almost like old school negotiating at the farmer's market. Like you don't have a lot to lose by going a little higher, and then maybe you can meet someone in the middle. So I probably would have had my number and then asked for a little bit more. And worst case scenario, you go back to your number.
Yes.
Yeah, he just priced this too low. Like he just came in too low. And that's because I think part of it is he was so glad. He called it a manna from heaven. He was so glad that he had a buyer. They came at the perfect time because he was thinking he should wind Backlinko down. And they really just made the right offer at the right time. And I mean, I'm sure if Ahrefs knew that this was available, or maybe if they knew it was available, they would have made an offer themselves. I mean, everybody would have been looking to buy Backlinko if they knew it was for sale for $5 million. I think Brian just, he had this idea of what backlinko was worth based on how much he was able to monetize it for, but it was just worth so much more money. And he didn't realize that, and he was looking to transition to his newer business, so he just didn't price it as such. So it's still congratulations, still 5 million, which is an amazing amount of money. It just it could have been so much more. And Brian gets at that. He should have started higher. And this is why, again, it's just, if you would have talked to maybe at least one, but like maybe even like 3 or 5 different people and said, even paid just like an hour for 5 different people and asked, what do you think about this? Talking to people from inside the SEO industry, talking to people outside of the SEO industry, completely independent people. What do you think about this? What is your impression? What would you do here? Because in a major transaction, you just want to slow down. Slow down. You don't need to move fast. This isn't a matter of you're going to lose this. Your asset's still your asset. The asset had money behind it the whole time. And in fact, Brian didn't realize how much money it had behind it. So he was just coming from a position of weakness, of low confidence, of desperation, when he never had to have any of those. Those characteristics they should have been completely absent. But Brian just wasn't. He was thinking from internally rather than looking at this situation objectively. And he just had something that was worth significantly more than he was valuing it, because again, he wasn't valuing it that high. And then so he continues on. I just have on this next slide, quote, not realizing that it's super unlikely, no matter what number you throw out there, they're going to come down to whatever number they're comfortable with. Yeah, this gets at it. SEMrush would have countered him, unless he came up with something ridiculous and wouldn't have budged off of it, which obviously that's not Brian. They were going to compromise. They were going to work towards this. So I think he could have easily started at 35 or 40. I don't know. I didn't evaluate backlinko, but I know it was worth a lot more than 5 million, and that's from nothing more than I've heard of backlinko. I knew of backlinko, and I was like, you are known by so many different people, and you are dominating one of the most lucrative niches there is. Like, you are out there swimming with the sharks. Like, there's no way backlinko is only worth $5 million. So this next slide, I just have a quote from what Brian already said. So to wrap up here, I think at least $10 million was left on the table. I just think that for SEMrush, this was going to be a really nice acquisition to have in their portfolio, and to, as they eventually said, have it as a second listing in Google, taking up another space in Google, feeding people into their software. So I think this was easily a $15 million sell, possibly much more. So again, I can't harp on it enough. If you have a major event or a major transaction, whether it's talking to somebody you don't know, maybe it's just even posting on Reddit, or talking to someone that's a professional in the industry, just gathering opinions. Right here, it's like there's no downside to just talking to people, unless they're going to bring you down even further. But if you're talking to people objectively, and just getting different opinions, and that's why you would get more than one opinion, because you want to make sure that you're not just talking to one person, you're getting different viewpoints. Hey, how would you approach this? What would you do if you were in my shoes? This Brian would have ended up with many more millions of dollars, just talking to people. And what would the cost have been there? Even paying people for their time, $500, $1,000 an hour, whatever it would be. That would be easily worth it, especially if you had someone handling this transaction for you. It would have been done sooner. You would have had a lot less stress, because the deal would have closed. They could have worked through all of the paperwork. They could have handled the SEMrush legal team. So then you could have had your lawyer, consultants, your business advisors, whoever it is, helping you close this deal. And yeah, they would have charged you a premium. Yeah, maybe you would have paid $500,000, but you would have ended up making so much more than you paid out. So I will include a link to this podcast, to the John Warrilow Built to Sell podcast, in the description. I will also include more links in the description, including the link to my video on hiring a consultant as your insurance.